From 1775 to 1783, General George Washington served his country as an instrumental part of the Revolutionary War. Through bloody battles, lost friends, injury, disappointment, fear, starvation, betrayal, alliances, miserable conditions, bitter winters, and so much more, Washington led his Continental Army to an American victory. What really describes who George was as a general, though, is illustrated by something that happened in 1782, a year after the war was won. The first draft of the Constitution didn't allow Congress the ability to tax the American people. It left that responsibility to the states. However, as the military was directly employed by Congress, this meant that the troops had no funds. These men fought for some 8 years to free their fellow colonists and give them their own country, but had starved for most of that time and lived in abhorrent conditions because they had no way to be paid. Years and years of this mistreatment had built up resentment in men who had given their lives to a cause and were now too hungry to remember what they'd been fighting for. All this led to the Newburgh Conspiracy. There were two main conspirators, Horatio Gates, Washington's second in command, and Henry Knox, a congressman. Ultimately, they were both interested in more power for Congress and the military. They stirred the pot of the already angry soldiers and made moves to stage a coup right beneath Commander General Washington's nose in his own camp. Of course, Washington found out about it. There was a meeting that would be led by Horatio Gates. Washington told his men that he would not condone this meeting, and he reminded the men that he was the commander-in-chief. He would not attend the meeting, but he would not forbid anyone from attending either. George told a little white lie. On the day of the meeting, he walked to the front of the room with a speech he had prepared in his hands. Ever the shy public speaker, his eyes scanned the paper to remember what he had written, but he couldn't make out the small letters. Before the men he had fought next to for years, the giant and legendary George Washington brought out spectacles to begin to read. When he looked up, he saw the faces of his men crestfallen to watch their untouchable leader, less of a man than a god in their eyes, in a time of human fragility. George's heart broke then, and he said, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in service to my country." In a second of deep empathy, humanity, and vulnerability, George Washington showed his men that he knew them, he loved them, and he would not allow injustice to befall them. He had fought and starved beside these men. He wouldn't fail them now. The coup ended right there and then. The deep bond that General Washington forged with his men was undoubtedly a reason for the American victory of the Revolutionary War. But it saved the new country from falling to greed in its earliest days. That was the kind of hero that General George Washington was. Introducing a brand new series of half-ounce silver coins designed by Miles Standish and celebrating the life of George Washington. General George Washington. An American icon, an American hero, an American life. Only from 7K.